Before we begin carving our designs into the project, the first thing I wanted to know is the types of Dremels we're going to be using. I have this Dremel here on the right, which is a cordless handheld Dremel, and it runs by just simply turning the on-off button. I'll show you that in just a moment. The other one we have are these electric Dremels, which are powered by the wall outlets in the shop. But before we begin talking about the Dremels, let's look at the Dremel bits that you'll have to choose from. If you look closely at these Dremel bits, the one on the right here, you'll notice has a round tip to it. The one on the left has a flat tip to it on the very end. So you have to determine which tip is best for your project. If you have curved lines in your design, then obviously you want to use the round tip for any curved lines. If you have more straight lines in your design, you want to use the Dremel bit that has a flat tip on it. Obviously, some of you may need to use both types of bits on your design simply because you may have a combination of curved lines and straight lines. Now, if we zoom out here, we'll take a look at the cordless Dremel first. With the cordless Dremel, the black area in here is where you're going to hold it with your hands like a giant pencil. On top of the Dremel, you'll notice it has a speed dial setting. We leave the speed dial setting where it is, and I've adjusted these to go the speed that we need to carve into our pine wood. We have two buttons on the top here. The one in the back here, the larger one, you don't need to be concerned with. I use that to change the bits. The smaller one is the power button. When you push it down once, it will turn the power on. When you push it down the second time, it will turn the power off. So when you're holding this type of Dremel here, you want to make sure you have a firm grip on it. And if you notice the handle down below here, this is going to allow you to keep your carving steady by resting the handle on top of the tabletop. When you carve, you always want the handle resting on the table. You don't want the handle up in midair where there's no support under it, because the Dremel bit will then skip across your project and leave some bad marks on there. So when we're using the curved tip bit, we'll take a design here and take a look at what part of the design do I want to start carving with. My recommendation to you is to use the longer lines. Start with those first to get a feel of the Dremel before you start working on the smaller detailed lines when you're carving. So as I begin to use the Dremel, first thing I want to do is make sure that I'm carving comfortably. And when I carve comfortably, I always want to position the piece of wood to where I can maneuver the Dremel smoothly without stopping and starting and stopping and starting. So as I want to start to carve this line here, I want to try to go over it one time very light. So the first thing I want to do is make sure I have a good grip with the Dremel. Push the button down one time. As you can hear it start up. Now I'm going to go back, and the first thing I want to do is simply like tracing over it with a pencil, only this time you want to have a grip on the Dremel and just pull the Dremel. Always try to pull it toward you. As you can see, we're not making any more damage yet. All I want to do the first time is get a guideline started with the Dremel, a little indentation in there. Now that I have a guideline started, I can press down just a little bit harder. Take your time. Take your time and make sure that you're not trying to go too fast, because the Dremel can do a lot of damage in just a little bit of time. I now have a little carving mark in there. I want to go just a little bit deeper so I can see it. If your hand starts to feel awkward as you're carving, stop carving and reposition the piece of wood so you're always carving comfortably. So as I continue to go around my design, I'm going to turn this off, wait till it stops before I set it down, and we want to take a look at the carving itself. When you're looking at the carving, the question is, how do I know how deep to carve into the piece of wood? My response to you is to hold your piece of wood up at arm's length, and if you can see the shadow, if you can see the carving into it, that's what we want when you're carving. Now if you're doing the 7th grade custom spinner project, you don't want to carve too deep. You always want to remember that eventually we're going to be drilling a hole down the middle of your project. If you carve too deep on the front, you'll see that when you go to drill the hole down the middle, you'll see the hole in the middle of your carving doesn't look very nice. But when you're carving with the cordless Dremel, always keep the handle resting on the project or on top of the table. Carve comfortably and do it just a little bit at a time, so you're starting with a guideline first, and then each time you go over the pass over your guideline, press just a little bit harder, a little bit at a time, so that you get a nice consistent line with your carving.